Hello, everyone. I want to share this little bit from Clint's Wagging the Dog about the RAND Corporation and the coming digital identity.
Now we read from the USA Today that Apple and Google release coronavirus contact tracing technology for public health mobile apps. This on May 20th, 2020. Apple and Google to harness phones for virus tracking. New software the companies plan to add to phones would make it easier to use Bluetooth wireless technology to track down people for who may have been infected by coronavirus carriers. That April 10th from the Associated Press. Apple and Google are releasing contact tracing technology to help public health officials develop mobile apps that can identify and test people who've spent time with or near someone infected with the coronavirus, the companies announced Wednesday. A number of U.S. states, including North Dakota and Alabama, and 22 countries have received access to the technology that was designed to help governments better track and contain the spread of the virus, the company said. In a statement, North Dakota Government Doug Bergman described the smartphone technology as being critical to getting communities and economies back up and running. This technology is very much supported by the RAND Corporation. To give you just one aspect of this company's influence in our culture, we see that Captain Kirk's predecessor in Star Trek was RAND Corporation Predictive Programming. In 2013, it was reported that in a rare and recently unearthed interview from 1965, the actor who preceded William Shatner as first captain of the Enterprise stated that the series was based on the RAND Corporation's projection of things to come. Actor Jeffrey Hunter, who played Captain Christopher Pike in the Star Trek pilot The Cage, told a Hollywood columnist in January of '65 that he hoped the pilot episode would be picked up as a series because he was intrigued by the fact that the series was based on the RAND Corporation's projection of things to come. Here we see the opinion of RAND, which is that automatic contact tracing should be integrated into the pandemic response system with widespread access to testing and a large number of manual contact tracers. And recently they released this video, COVID-19, the realities of automated contact tracing. The Atlantic reports, we were warned. When the inevitable inquiry into the government's response to COVID-19 happens, it will conclude that signs of a coming crisis were everywhere. How were we warned? We were warned in 2012 when the RAND Corporation surveyed the international threats arrayed against the United States and concluded that only pandemics pose an existential danger in that they were capable of destroying America's way of life. And that's why it's called predictive programming. We were warned in 2015 when Ezra Klein of Vox, after speaking with Bill Gates about his algorithmic model for how a new strain of flu could spread rapidly in today's globalized world, wrote that, quote, a pandemic disease is the most predictable catastrophe in the history of the human race, if only because it has happened to the human race so many, many times before, unquote. If there was anything humanity could be certain that it needed to prepare for to prevent the deaths of a lot of people in a little time, it was this. From the RAND blog, we read, it's going to be the vaccination, stupid. From August 21st, 2020, it states that the increasingly positive news on COVID-19 vaccine development is also bringing growing alarm over whether Americans will trust these vaccines when they become available. Indeed, as the possibility for a vaccine increases, so too may rise tensions and protests. As a former head of RAND Health and as the current chair of the RAND Health Board of Advisors, we are part of a small group of RAND, UCLA, and Stanford researchers who are attempting to tackle the logistical challenges of opening schools and the economy without negative health consequences. Here is what we know and what we would propose to increase public acceptance of widespread vaccination. While we were clearly not prepared for this virus, we now need to understand how we are going to roll out any proven vaccine. Unfortunately, there's no such thing. Here are some ideas about approaching vaccine distribution strategically in this environment. It states that, firstly, a crash effort in vaccine literacy should include the federal government, including the President, Cabinet, Congress, and Supreme Court, and all federal employees, whether they are Republicans or Democrats, should publicly get the vaccine together. Social media platforms should not be allowed to function as unfiltered vectors of anti-vax falsehoods. Now keep in mind that if you're anti-vaccination, meaning against vaccination, it really just means you're pro-nature. You just want to be left alone. If you are pro-vaccine, you have a belief system, a scientific lens that you're looking through, believing that vaccines actually work, when in truth there is no scientific evidence whatsoever that shows vaccines to be safe or effective. This will be shown in depth as we proceed through this series of documentaries. Second, we need an equitable distribution plan that reflects social realities. The vaccine should go first to health workers, essential workers, teachers, and the elderly, and people whose living circumstances, from prisons to apartments, make it impossible to self-isolate if they get the disease. Now, anytime a corporation, or for that matter government, labels you as non-essential, you know there is a huge social and civil problem. We need to ensure there is no discrimination, racial or otherwise, in the distribution process. And vaccinating teachers is particularly important because we cannot expect them to risk their lives to teach their students. There's broad agreement that keeping the schools closed will increase the gap between advantaged and disadvantaged children. A generation is at stake. Most importantly, we should consider whether and how to provide at the time of vaccination an electronic readable card confirming that the person had been vaccinated. We should also consider whether it is good policy or even legal to require employees, guests, students, or others to present a readable card proving they have been vaccinated if they want to work, fly, eat at a restaurant, study in a classroom, go to the opera, take a cruise ship, etc. And now the true intention of the Rand Corporation can be seen for what it is.
Ran into this article, MasterCard joins Blockchain Digital Identity Alliance. I didn't know what the Trust Over IP Foundation was, but it includes Accenture, Evernym, IBM, R3, that's private blockchain out of Singapore. But we're all familiar with ID 2020 to provide a digital identity for everyone. Now this is somehow lumped into the COVID credentials initiative to develop immunity passport. You're going to have to pay for this monthly or quarterly. At least some prices are coming out between $20 and $90. This was first pushed by the airlines, electronic travel authorization, to make sure you wouldn't infect anybody on the plane. COVID credentials initiative, deploy privacy-preserving verifiable credentials. This is where it gets deep and strange. Now, 60 Fortune 500 companies formed their own self-sovereign identity groups to make sure that we all get these immunity passports. At least that's a surface layer, because when we get into the universal registrar, otherwise known as a decentralized identifier, it goes deep and it keeps rewinding to the same companies again and again, from the finance to the operating systems. And the thing standing in the way right now are these interoperable overlays, because it's all about getting you registered on this thing and somebody else to oversee you as a guardian. This is where we tumble down the rabbit hole. Individual organizations willing to take legal responsibility for managing the agent wallet on behalf of the person under guardianship, meaning you're owned by somebody in the corporate world. Self-sovereign identities, decentralized identity, overseen by sovereign, the Identity for All Council, I4A. And the guardianship means you're an owned piece of property. They're going to digitize individuals, organizations, natural things and man-made things. You want to touch any of that? you're going to have to be using V code. And to give you an idea of the money and backing behind this, these are just the players in Singapore that are bringing this to life. Australian politicians say you won't be able to partake in any type of everyday life if you don't get this COVID passport. RFID chips are not mandatory for now, but you shall not buy, sell, or trade without this mark. And then beyond the catchy headlines, which most people don't go after, if you read further into it, you're going to see this ID 2020 Alliance is basically started by Microsoft. And then it mixes in all these biometric technologies and digital identities. But then there has to be a storehouse or the technology behind it to run it all. It's not just blockchain, that's its own thing. But then there has to be an interface between that and companies holding on to this information. And that's where we get into Accenture, IBM, Oracle, and the whole gamut of tech companies. And it does seem at the end of this is going to be a global ID system, not country-centric. Now, the way to soft trickle this thing in here is your immunity passport. This is pushed by the airlines. So if you fly for business, you're definitely going to have to get it. If you're involved in the travel industry, you must get it or else you will lose your job. So it's a way for the soft drip feed disclosure into this. Immunity passport, airlines are calling for it, digital ID tracking system. So if you want to ever travel again and get on an airplane, they're going to make you go to your doctor and get a test. And before you can get on the airplane, you have to enter their credentials into some system weeks before or a week before you travel, and this will be on a central database, and the airlines will have access to it. Now, I don't know how much access they have to your medical records, but they'll have an access to see a positive, negative reading, and that's where it begins. And here's where we tumble down the rabbit hole, because 60 Fortune 500 companies right now are creating something called the Self-Sovereign Identity Group. And what they're going to do is focus all their efforts into creating these immunity passports, which are going to be required for you to get on a subway or get into a taxi or take an Uber, or if you want to book an Airbnb in the future, you're going to be required to do this. And as I've heard, somebody said that even to enter a grocery store in the future, you'll have to show this, that you're tested negative so you don't contaminate the cans on the shelves or something. So go over to the COVID-19 Credentials Initiative site, deploying privacy-preserving, verifiable credential projects. So you can't verify your identity anymore with the government. It can only be through these private companies that are going to tell you how you have to verify and how you have to pay for this every time you want to verify. And see, when I first started looking into it, it was 60 organizations and then 100, and now it's more than 200. So a perfect example of this being deployed right now is in China, where you see the girl there. She has her phone turned toward you. It has a green mark on it, which means she's allowed to travel freely, get on a subway, bus, whatever, go into stores. If that's red, they won't let her on anything publicly. So I was wondering, how much is this going to cost? Are all these companies going to eat the cost and just do it for free because they love humanity? Of course not. Now, this is going to be forced by law in the future. The Immunity Pass card or the Immunity Pass digital itself, the physical card's $20, and the digital app that goes along with it is $80. So since most American media is talking about being tested monthly, you can look at this as having a $90 monthly test to prove that you're not infected wherever you go. You get the card with it. It's a nice looking card. But see those barcodes and the QR code on there? This is where it gets a little bizarre, because anybody can check on you. Anybody who has access to this data system here, all they have to do is either scan either of those, and then boom, your identity is going to come up, and everything about your medical history associated with the COVID inside this thing. Plus, they're going to know your name, your address, your identity, your birth date, the height, and all these things about you biometrically. Now, it's anybody who has access to the system, and that's going to be millions and millions and millions of people. So nothing could go wrong with that, I'm sure. So how it seems to work so far here is you're going to get a color code assigned to your Immunity Pass based on the test results that you have to go to your doctor yourself and get, and then you put it into Immunity Pass, and they enter their credentials for you, whatever the scan code was off of your medical results. White is not tested, and then wherever you go, if it's white or you didn't get tested, you're not allowed in. Red, you're positive. Then you're going to have to take additional tests and additional tests and additional tests until you can prove some sort of antibodies. And then yellow will be some sort of presumed immunity. And then green will finally turn over from the red after you've had umpteen tests to prove something. And Immunity Pass is not the only one out there. And I did a previous video on this talking about just one aspect of entering a supermarket that's going to be required beyond the mask wearing and all that. You're going to have to show this as green before they're going to let you into a store where if you're getting stimulus money, at least in the United States, that'll be deposited into your digital wallet with the new Fed coin. You're going to be required to take this in at the point of purchase. No green, no entry. And everybody's going to have this on their phones, or else you're not going to be able to go in anywhere, buy, sell, trade, or transact. Now, CoviPass is another one. So there's 3 already rolled out. And these are multi-billion-dollar companies rolling these platforms out to get you tested and into the system. And what gets to the spookiest part of all of this is the ownership of you as a human on this planet by the corporations that are then going to oversee you as a guardian. Just like a parent can oversee a child as a guardian, the corporations are taking delivery of you, your resource, your body, and they're going to oversee it as a guardian agent. Now, they're going to call it digital guardianship, and it's going to be put in the cloud. They're going to call it a cloud agent or a cloud wallet service where, highlighted in blue, an individual or organization willing to take the legal responsibility for managing that cloud agent wallet / Fed coin deposited for your stimulus on behalf of the person under guardianship called the dependent. That's you and me. So when we take a look back here, it should be almost inverted, where the verifier and issuer, the corporations making their own laws to make sure that they can own you, and you're just at the bottom. No say in what goes on, really. You can say no, but I think this is going to be the division of humanity here. You say no, you go grow your own food, you provide your own electricity, medicine, water, and you get out of the system, or you stay in and you continue. But the scariest thing for me that maybe dropped my jaw here for a second was the identity for all council. This sounds something straight out of whatever dystopian movie you can name through history, or even some of these off-world space movies, Star Trek and whatever it would be. The I4A. Sounds so kind and gentle, identity for all. So when you see such innocent language as MasterCard joins the ID 2020 initiative exploring decentralized digital identities, that's exactly what they're doing, to own you. And not just you, individuals. It'll be about organizations, governments, companies, natural things, man-made things. Anything ever made, anything ever grown, natural or synthetic, will be in this system, digitized. And when you have to buy your food by the calorie, moving forward, which is part of this plan, you will have to understand cloud wallets. You will have to understand blockchain. And you'll quickly come to the realization that without any of that, you will not be able to buy, sell, or trade anything as a human being on this planet. The tentacles are around you. And you might say, well, I will never do that. But the Australian politicians are already a step ahead of you and passing laws down there that says you will be deprived of participation in everyday life if you do not do this.
Well, I just thought it was important. I mean, it kind of goes along with what I've been saying, although I believe they want to literally upload us to the cloud, and that possibly this coming synthetic vaccine that will merge man with machine may take this even a step farther than what they're talking about here with the CoviPass. Or some sort of card or some sort of app on your phone. But anyways, it's crazy stuff coming.